With respect to, the police, his interaction and the way in which the police sort of, captured him, because he was, I mean, they were on the hunt for a cop killer in some respect. I mean, yeah, no police officer didn't die, but the information they had was someone who had actually chased a police officer and fired at the police officer. So when that kind of call goes out uh, to police officers, it's all hands on deck in finding this person right away. And so, although it does, from hindsight, is is 2015. I mean, you know, now that we know that he was completely innocent, obviously, looking at the way in which he was manhandled appears to be absolutely egregious. But I would say that the way in which he was handled, and secured and controlled by the police officers is not unusual in such a, again, you got to keep in mind that they were looking for someone who had fired a police officer and at a police officer who's, armed and dangerous from their perspective, from the information they had at the time. So the way in which he was handled is in keeping with procedure, I would say. Now, I also heard that apparently a police officer put his foot on his face or on his neck, or I mean, that obviously, uh, it goes beyond, a reasonable use of force. Particularly, I understand that he was not resisting. So that's kind of my first comment. But again, this, sort of on a talk show talking about. I mean, I have reservation about that from the get go. Mhm.
In terms of what he did say about how he was treated, right? Will Prosper was there. He was talking a little bit about how this is an exemplary. He was acting as a good citizen, trying to report this and trying to help out as a witness to this situation, and yet he was turned into the main primary suspect. Do you agree in that sense that Mr. Camara composed himself as a great citizen, did not arrest, he did everything he had to do, and yet he wasn't given the same respect by the police?
Well, that's one way of looking at it. Obviously, I mean, yes, he did call 911, but the question is, did the officers knew? Did they know about that when they arrested him, or is it something that they found out afterwards? Were they, was the information that they had in was basically the information they had received from Officer Vig, which was basically, a plate and the name of the registered owner, and they proceeded to his residence, and when he showed up, they arrested him. Again, we don't know all the information they had, and whether or not, notwithstanding the fact that he called 911 again, because of the severity and the seriousness of the allegations, and that they were, him being the potential, uh, officer, that a person that has shot at a police officer. um, and so, I mean, right now we're looking at this situation with hindsight, everything that we know and everything that's come out in the media. But in all fairness to the police officer at the scene, I got to tell you, when that kind of call goes out, um, it's not going to be handled with the necessary, all the, you know it's going to be, again, we want to capture this person, and that's what they have to deal with. So in their mind, they were dealing with, someone who had shot a police officer, and the use of force that they used in their mind was appropriate given the information, I think, that they had at the time.
Isn't there though there has to be sort of a presumption of innocence once he's at least processed in the system, because it seems like
Yeah, of
he
course.
6 days he did not have a chance to speak to his pregnant wife, right?
Yep.
So what about that issue in the system? What happened there?
Well, the presumption of innocence, I mean, it's a legal concept that a person carries with them throughout the entire judicial process. Now, you got to remember that he hadn't been charged yet when the officers, captured him. I'm using the term very loosely here, but so there was no the presumption of innocence again kicks in once a person has been charged uh, and accused of a crime. Now, he hadn't been accused of anything when the police officers found him, but their intent was really to control him and to capture him. I keep using the term and arrest in assess whether or not they had the right person. Of course, there's a certain assumption of not being the person that did the deed, but at the same time, officers had to protect themselves in terms of safety of the officer dealing with a dangerous person. I mean, I guarantee you that the call went out that this person was armed and dangerous, and so that's the kind of police response that you would see anywhere in dealing with a potentially armed and dangerous individual.
But now dealing with hindsight, right? This
Hmm.
idea that this shouldn't have happened to an
Yep.
innocent man. Does that excuse it at all? I mean, the SPVM, Mr. Caron is has apologized and Mr. Camara
Yeah.
has accepted it, but does that really change what has happened to this man?
Well, there's two part to your question, whether it excuses the police officer's conduct in arresting Mr. Camara based on the fact that they were looking for an armed and dangerous individual is one thing, right? I don't think that anything that happened afterwards in hindsight uh, uh, has any real bearing on the information that the officers had at the time and the type of individual that they were looking for, and officer safety that had to be paramount. Okay, that's number one. Number two, with respect to uh, uh, the way in which the investigation was conducted, is his interrogation, uh, the searching of his residence, uh, all of that. Well, it'll be up to the investigation to to assess whether or not that was appropriate, or was an excessive use of police authority. Um, and of course, of course, the laying of charges and what the fact that he spent 6 days in custody, all of that will have to be addressed and assessed uh, uh, on its own merit. So the first part, I would say that if I was the officer out there looking for an armed and dangerous man, and I had the information that he was the main suspect, I would have more than likely arrested him in the same fashion. Now, the follow up investigation is a different story.
So two avenues in terms of that. So everything after the fact though could have been different, but the arrest likely would have been the same because of those
Yeah,
circumstances.
the immediate arrest, when you deal with an information that you're looking for an armed and dangerous suspect that just fired at a police officer, uh, it's not going to be handled with kid gloves. I can tell you that right away. And that's just the reality of policing. Now, a lot of folks will argue this was excessive use of force and so on, but I totally disagree with that in terms of securing his arrest. After that, that's a different story altogether, and how he should have been treated, whether they should have listened to him. I think they should, and I think that and that's where, in my opinion, racial profiling enters into the equation, more so than the original arrest. I can tell you that. But racial profiling enters into the equation with respect to whether he was believed, whether they paid attention to his claim of innocence throughout the interrogation. Uh, I think it played into the equation highly played into the equation because this concept of the hollow. Okay, there's a halo concept, which is basically the first impression that you get when you're dealing with someone. Okay, and for instance, because you're wearing glasses, some folks may, and I'm wearing glasses too, some folks may automatically think that we're brilliant, and that's been proven, that people that wear glasses are automatically thought to be more intelligent than those that are not wearing glasses. That's just at the first. And then some folks will treat you as if you are more brilliant because you're wearing glasses, and they go about the way they're going to treat you based on that first impression, or at least belief. Now that applies to also in a negative fashion, whether with respect to blacks and people of color, and where blacks are assumed to be young black men are assumed to and dress in a particular fashion, or not dress in a particular fashion, are automatically assumed to be perhaps more prone to lie. If they have an accent, they maybe not, they may be. So everything else and the way in which you interact with that individual after that may taint the way in which you will consider their statement. So in this case, I would argue that this probably happened in Mr. Camara's case. And then you enter into the other notion of tunnel vision, right? So now you think, okay, I got this guy figured out. He's an immigrant. He's got blah blah blah, uh, and whatever he's telling me, these people they lie more, they lie, and then you go on about this thing to prove your initial assertion that this is the guy, this is the right guy. I think that might have entered into the equation in terms of the way in which the investigation was conducted. And then it carries over. This is not unique to policing, by the way. It carries over to the public prosecution, right? They're supposed to be the second sober thought agency that remove from the emotional uh, 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 um, trend that the police officers were subjected to because one of their own had been shot at and so on. They're supposed to be the sober thought on how this whole thing, and but it looks as though they got caught up in this excitement, and very rapidly went forward with investigation, which is, in my opinion, and from having dealt with crown prosecutor in this province, and also from colleagues of mine, this is very unusual, because typically crown prosecutors, prosecution's office are very, very hesitant to lay charges unless they're guaranteed they're going to not only they're going to secure a conviction. That's part of their policies anyhow. And so that's why it's interesting here.
So there's a number of steps to investigate, because obviously this will go into a public investigation.
No, I won't go
And
into a public
well,
investigation,
the judge is going to be looking at this a
but it's
little
not
bit
going to be
clearer.
public.
Right. So what, I mean, they were saying they'll try to be as transparent as possible in all of this.
Yeah, I'm sure
um
they will.
but do you agree, or at least feel, because you've said this does touch on racial profiling, do you think that if it was any other person, non-racialized person, this would have been handled differently?
Two things. Number one, this is not a public uh, inquiry or investigation. This is administrative investigation, and the mandate of Justice Dion, right, does not include looking at racial profiling. Okay, that's my understanding. I stand to be corrected, but that's my understanding. And so right away, uh, they're looking at, potential violations of procedures. They're looking at, for the DPCP, they're looking at whether or not they adhere to their directives, and the report will be released to the government, and the government will choose what they are going to release. So that's not a public inquiry, and so that's number one. Number two, whether I feel that this would have happened differently had it been a 50-year-old white man wearing a tie and who happened to be a university professor, you best believe it would have been different. um, and so racial profiling, in my opinion, uh, influenced the way in which Mr. Camara was treated, not only by the police, by the way, but also by the DCP, but again, without a full contextual and historical analysis of the way in which similar cases have been handled in the past, you can't come to a conclusive real conclusive conclusion to as to whether or not uh, uh, this was racial profiling, because unless they uncovered that, they use uh, negative slur words, and racial slurs against Mr. Camara, and but unless they were, unless that kind of material comes out in the open, in which at which time the judge would have no other alternative but to dig into it a little deeper. Racial profiling cannot be proven by direct evidence.